dysfunction going on down in Jefferson City, though the one thing they actually could agree on and get a bill passed was they rewrote the rules for ride sharing. Graham Renz joins us, a policy, what's your official title over there?
Policy researcher.
Policy researcher at the Show Me Institute, a man who is on the double secret probation list because he refuses to watch Vision Quest. When you do watch it, you're going to be like, I hate to say this, McGraw, but that was a really good movie. All right, let's get to this ride sharing. So what did they pass and what did Greitens sign that now ride sharing and taxi companies can all coexist happily ever after in the state of Missouri?
Yeah, that's right. So it's soon going to be a lot easier to get from point A to point B and to earn some extra cash working for Uber, Lyft, or some other ride-sharing service. So the governor signed HB House Bill 130, and that bill streamlines regulations for companies like Uber and Lyft, other ride-sharing companies across the entire state of Missouri. It sort of gets rid of red tape at the local level, so taxi commissions in St. Louis and Kansas City can't try to keep these ride-sharing firms out of the market through just overly burdensome regulation.
Right.
And just last year, Missouri is one of 5 states that didn't have statewide transportation network company or TNC regulations. That's the kind of jargon for these firms like Uber and Lyft, TNC. So Missouri is sort of updating its transportation policy to get with the 21st century.
Okay, so now is everything under one roof, or are there separate laws for taxi cabs, which is ride sharing, versus Uber and Lyft, which is the technical definition of ride sharing?
Yeah, so there are technically 2 different sets of regulations. So taxis self-regulate quite a bit. So there's a commission here in St. Louis. There's a similar commission in Kansas City that imposes local regulations on taxis, sets standards for them. This bill, HB 130, does not apply to traditional taxis. There's some things in there that talk about it, but it primarily allows firms like Uber and Lyft to get into the market. So some folks think that might not be fair. I think there's some reasonable debate around that. For instance, this bill prevents companies like Uber and Lyft from getting street hails and stuff like that. But I think the big push was just to allow TNCs to get into the market, and we're already seeing taxi companies deregulate in the same ways that this bill, HB 130, deregulated ride-sharing services.
I've been in St. Louis for 18 years now. I've never once hailed a cab while standing on a street corner. That really doesn't exist in Missouri, unlike New York, where you want to go from point A to point B. In Missouri, it doesn't work that way. So the fact that Uber and Lyft are banned from picking somebody up on a street corner is somewhat disingenuous.
Well, when you're downtown, when you're at bars, I mean, there's taxis floating around. And
I hear you, but it's very rare where you're going to be standing on a street corner waiting for a taxi to come by. But with that being said, all right, so Uber and Lyft, they can now pick up at the airport.
Yeah, paying all the fees that taxis do.
Paying all the same fees. But what's interesting is taxi cab companies have apps now.
Oh yeah. They're coming up with all sorts of stuff to try to compete with Uber and Lyft.
But the government, you being a free marketer, should be upset that there are 2 sets of standards for the same industry, more or less, right? I mean, we shouldn't treat them differently. They're the same. What's the difference if I buy 10 cars and hire or let these guys use my cars through Uber and Lyft, or I buy 10 cars and open up a McGraw's taxi stand?
Yeah, so I think this bill was it's a good step in the right direction. I think you're right that I think there's reasonable debate to be had over whether taxis and ride-sharing companies are the same beast.
Right.
But as things stood before this law was signed, there was no such thing really as Uber and Lyft in Missouri. I mean, it operated here technically illegally, but the whole point of regulations were to keep those companies out. And a lot of the regulations were created by taxi commissions. So I think ultimately the push is towards deregulation for both companies like Uber and Lyft, TNCs, and taxis. But we have to see what was the source of these regulations. It was taxi companies themselves trying to keep competition out. Now, I think, like you say, we should be looking to deregulate all sorts of for-hire vehicles, and taxi commissions are doing that themselves already.
One of the things was that the Uber and Lyft companies are exempt from local taxes. Is that the same as taxi cabs?
Yeah, so Uber drivers, Lyft drivers have to pay their earnings tax. They have to pay these things.
Yeah, what about the company itself, though? Because there's a $5,000 fee, application fee. But then in the stories coming out of Jefferson City, it said that they were exempt from local taxes.
So I'm not sure, for instance, in St. Louis, there's a payroll tax. I'm not positive if Uber or Lyft, these companies will be exempt from the payroll tax, which is more or less an earnings tax for businesses. But I know drivers are going to be paying the earnings tax just like any other.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
Right, I understand that. And I don't know if it's a company is exempt or, as you say, you know, what I'm trying to find out is if local taxis have to pay local taxes, whereas Uber and Lyft don't have to pay local taxes.
So the local taxes I have in mind would be like the earnings tax, which everybody who works or lives in St. Louis is going to pay. There's a lot of other permitting fees. So, for instance, you mentioned the $5,000 figure. That is a lump sum that any transportation network company has to pay the state to start getting permits for their drivers.
Right.
But there's things like meter fees, updating fees that taxis traditionally have to pay. Now, those are sort of the fees that taxi commissions are looking to get rid of now so that they compete. But other taxes, other local taxes, I'm not sure.
I don't know why we need a taxi cab commission anymore. If there's not an Uber and Lyft commission, why do we need a taxi cab commission?
You know, that's a great question, and I think it was in the Post-Dispatch the other week that there was an article talking about this, and it ended. Is a taxi commission a dinosaur that's just trying to hold on for life? And I don't want to make any predictions, but I mean, we can just look at the trajectory of the market, where if we need this sort of old school top-down regulatory body anymore, and I think,
why doesn't a cab company just call themselves a ride-sharing company?
Well, that's another big push too. Is we already see taxi companies shifting huge swaths of their fleet to TNC-like services. So part of the push was, hey, taxi companies just change, get with it. You can become a TNC.
Right.
You don't have to stay one of these ossified taxi companies.
Right.
Change, get with the market, and that's what we see a lot of folks doing.
All right, interesting stuff. Where can we read more?
We can read more at our website, showmeinstitute.org.
And I believe I was on my Uber app, and there were already Uber drivers in St. Charles. So has this taken effect immediately, or has it?
So it technically takes effect in August, but more or less, Uber, Lyft, they were just waiting for some regulatory certainty.
So, now they're off and running.
Yep.
Graham Renz, policy researcher at the Show Me Institute. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me on, McGraw.
850, Big 550, KT.